It's a bit like saying, well, no one can play football because we're not all Premier League footballers, so sorry, you're not, don't play it, don't. Like, of course we don't do that. It's bananas to think that we'd say that, and yet we do it with music, which is possibly even more universal because almost everybody can make music.
Good day, Tamsin. How are you doing?
Hello, I am doing very well, thank you. It is so lovely to finally meet you.
Yes, actually, my teammate Angela had the opportunity to play with you in Edinburgh, which I thought was fantastic.
That was so exciting. That was super exciting because it's not often that I get the chance to actually play the harp with other people, which is really sad, actually. There's not many other harpists where I'm based in southwest of France, specifically not the Celtic harp or the lever harp. If I were up in Brittany, which is like a 12-hour drive, there's an awful lot more sort of Celtic culture around, obviously, because it is a Celtic area. But in the southwest, not so many. So I was delighted to be there. And I was like, oh, hello, I know your name. I don't know your face. I know your name. Let's play music.
Let's play.
Yeah, because that's to me what it's all about. Even if you've never met someone, with the harp, you can just sit down and play music. I don't know. It's just so delightful. And it was a real
It is
pleasure.
magical. Yeah. Well, I don't know much about you until recently. I would love you to tell us about your music journey. How did the harp came into your life?
I, this is a really interesting question, and I will try not to make it too long-winded. But I think it's possibly not the most. I say it's not the most obvious sort of pathway, but then again, I think when you ask people, not as many people as you think actually have that straightforward. Well, I did this, and then this, and then this, and then this. Many people actually have much more interesting, or much more varied, shall we say, ways into the harp. So I decided when I was about 3 years old that I was going to be a harpist. I wanted to be a harpist. And I said, Mummy, can I play the harp, please? And she said, that's very nice, dear. Here's a piano. Because we had a piano in the house, and my mum played the piano and was a piano teacher. And it turns out I'm like the world's worst pianist. I just could never, ever get my hands around it. To this day, I don't know why. To this day, all I can play is a few scales, and that's about it. I can, tap out a tune, and that really is my limit on the piano. And so I kept saying, well, Mummy, can I play the harp, please? And she's like, well, no, because if your 5-year-old says, can I play the harp? You think, oh my goodness, no. And I think when I was about 9, so 6 years later, after a lot of nagging, she finally thought, well, this child might actually be serious about this. And we went to a concert locally. And I have to admit, I do not remember anything about the rest of the concert, because we'd often go to sort of local gigs and concerts and stuff like that, which is delightful. And I am hoping to do that with my own son. So, so that concert going is not this mysterious, mystical thing that other people do. And anyway, there was a harpist there. And embarrassingly enough, I don't even remember who the harpist was, but I was just so fascinated by her harp. And in the interval, my parents took me up to just have a word with her, and she just let me have a go on her harp. I was sort of 9 years old, and I was like, oh my God, this is my dream come true. I'd never ever seen a harp in real life before then, only in books and pictures. I don't really know where I got the idea, if I'm honest. I must have seen it on TV or in a film, or maybe in a picture book, the princess playing the harp. There'd be some, I don't know what it was. And yeah, so she gave my parents the number of a local harp teacher. And I was super lucky because it was like a 15-minute drive from my parents' house. Who knew? Because there's not many harps in the north of England where I'm from. Again, it's not an area where there's an awful lot of sort of folk music and that kind of music, but she didn't live very far away. And so they got me some harp lessons and rented me a harp. And I think they thought she'll get over this in 6 months. And that was nearly 30 years ago. So I didn't get over it in 6 months or ever, and I don't think I ever will quite get over my love affair with the harp. So that's how the harp came into my life. How I ended up being a harpist is a slightly different story. I'm happy to elaborate if you'd like to.
I would love to hear how you end up being a professional harpist.
I don't really know how to do anything else in a weird kind of a way. I sort of organically became a harpist. This would have been, so when I started playing the harp, it would have been sort of the mid-90s. And at the time, the lever harp wasn't considered like a proper instrument. It was for the babies. It was so you could get started. Excuse me. And I think, luckily in the UK at least, that attitude is very much disappearing. I think it probably still remains in some places, but mercifully, you can now do a degree course on the traditional harp. The lever harp has definitely come into its own. I certainly noticed that here in the south of France, the pedal harp is the real harp. And in fact, I was asked by someone just the other day, so do you play the real harp or do you play the Celtic harp?
Oh.
And I was like, oh well, I play the lever harp actually. And then we had a really interesting discussion about the name of this harp, because for a start, it has many names and they all kind of refer to the same thing, broadly speaking, obviously. So anyway, if you wanted to do grades, we have a system of grades in the UK. If you're probably familiar with these, it goes from 1 to 8 usually, 1 being beginner level and 8 being sort of semi-professional level or professional level, depending on what you're wanting to do. But you couldn't progress past grade 4, I think, at that time, if you played the lever harp. It just wasn't an option. There was no exam syllabus to continue, as far as I was aware. Now, obviously, you've got the Scottish traditional exams. I think there's probably Irish traditional exams, and obviously the 2 main exam boards now. You can go all the way to diploma with the lever harp, which is amazing. But at the time, you could not. So I made the switch to the pedal harp, which was the sort of accepted route. And again, this was a huge leap of faith on the part of my parents, and I'm extremely grateful for them. To them for sort of taking that leap of faith on like a 12-year-old. I mean, pedal harps are, they're expensive, and we didn't have a lot of money, so it was a huge. I'm so grateful that they kind of had that faith. And then I felt even worse when 2 or 3 years later I realized I was a terrible pedal harpist. I just. Again, I love it as an instrument. I still have a pedal harp and I still play it for pleasure and for fun, and it does such wonderful things. You can do things you can't do on the lever harp. But having originally played for so long the lever harp, where you learn a tune and then you improvise around it, or you learn a tune and then you put a bass line to it, and printed music, oh yeah, that's a thing. And I literally only kind of learned as much as I kind of had to learn to pass the sight reading in the exams, which I only ever scraped the sight reading. And then on my grade 4 exam, I realized that, oh, you could memorize your pieces, and that would mean you could skip the sight reading. And I always memorized my pieces anyway, because it sort of didn't occur to me to use the music, because that was the way I'd been taught, was by ear. And I was like, oh, I'm doing that. And then I got to my pedal harp teacher, who was a delightful man. Nothing wrong with him as a person or as a teacher, but I think he was probably like, what is this child doing? She has no technique, she can't read music, she doesn't have any background in classical, and that's fine, it's nothing to be ashamed of. But again, I think he was a bit like, her teacher wants me to prepare her for music college, or some sort of very, quite at the time, quite narrow-minded, or no, not narrow-minded, narrow field. Because he said, everything has to be so perfect, you see. Your elbows have to be at the exact right angle, and your wrists have to be, the standards are extremely high. And I was, put the fear into me.
I can see how you describe yourself as a not very well-behaved pedal harpist when you showed up and have your teacher found you in that state.
And I was just like, well, I can play this and I can play this. And, he wasn't unkind or anything, but it was just such a different mentality that I was utterly unprepared for, because I didn't know any other classical musicians. So I guess I wasn't sort of prepared for this massive switch from my first teacher, who was very, I hate to say open, she was very open-minded, but that implies my other teacher was not. That's not what I'm trying to say. But she introduced me to lots of world music, lots of different traditions. She wasn't a particular stickler for technique, as long as I enjoyed playing the pieces. And she'd make me play medieval music, South American music, some jazz pieces, folk music. She'd let me arrange my own stuff. She'd let me compose, very much exploring the harp, exploring the music. And then suddenly, wham, you can only play what you can sight read. And as previously discussed, my sight reading was atrocious. So I spent a couple of years just playing octaves, and suddenly for me, there was no pleasure in it because I hadn't anticipated that sort of mental switch. And when I describe myself as a badly behaved pedal harpist, I have a very distinct memory of playing a piece by Debussy and just making a comment that I think it'd be better if the left hand had this inversion and not the other. It was like, but
Not
this is
allowed.
one cannot change Debussy. But I think one cannot. And I was like, okay, you know what? Like, why not? And I obviously now as an adult, there is absolutely, one should respect composers' wishes. There's composed music, and there's music which is not composed. But at the time, I was just like, but I think it sounds better, which is possibly a very arrogant thing to say for a 15-year-old. But yeah, so I just sort of was like, well, I guess I won't study music after all because it's clearly not for me. Which I think was quite a sad realization. I was like, this music isn't for me because obviously music is this, and I do this. And again, at the time, makes me sound really old. There's no internet, there's no YouTube to sort of show you what other people are doing. And if you didn't know any other musicians who were doing what you were doing, then it was classical or sorry, bye bye, you're not a musician. And so I stopped actually playing the harp. I stopped taking lessons. I stopped playing the harp. I mean, I sort of play it for fun, but and I went to study languages at university. I studied Japanese, which I had a great time, and I adore studying languages. And I just sort of played the harp for fun, really. And then, sorry, this is a terribly long-winded story.
I like that you're playing the harp for fun though, because I had a very similar experience. I studied classical piano growing up,
Mhm.
and I have one of those teacher where like thou shall follow all the notes on the pages, right? And thou
Mhm.
shall follow all the syllabus. And it sucked the joy out of playing an instrument for me.
I think it does for a lot of people, and I think there is a place for it. There's absolutely a place, and some people really enjoy that. Some people find the joy in the interpretation of a specific set of notes in a specific order, and there's nothing wrong with that. But I don't think it suits everybody, and I think
I agree.
trying to say that that's what music is, which we have a tendency to do in Western Europe and possibly North America and Canada. Um, I think that's quite sad because music
Yeah.
is so much more than that. And it's not just for a special set of elite people who've learnt this very particular skill. It's a bit like saying, well, no one can play football because we're not all Premier League footballers, so sorry, you're not, don't play it, don't. Like, of course we don't do that. It's bananas to think that we'd say that, and yet we do it with music, which
Mhm.
is possibly even more universal because almost everybody can make music. Um,
Yeah.
so yeah.
Yeah, I personally am gravitated to more cheeky musicians. I'm not the prim and proper, let's put it on a big gown and sit behind the pedal harp kind of harpist, which is what I have found a lot with your music. There's a lot of fun in it, which makes me
Thank you.
happy as a listener and someone who want to play the music. So kudos to you for
Thank you.
continuing it on somehow. But tell me, how did you get back into it then after you studied Japanese?
So
How did it all happen?
so I graduated in 2008, which for anyone who's unfamiliar with what happened in 2008, I'm sure you're familiar with, the giant financial crash and the fact that the economy suddenly tanked and there were suddenly no jobs. So I graduated, and of course, we sort of, I guess we went to graduate fairs and stuff, and basically what we were told, sorry guys, like maybe try again next year because no one's hiring. There's no, there just sort of wasn't anything, and I sort of suddenly thought, I don't really know what to do with myself. That sounds very strange now. I had a degree. I had a degree in Japanese, and I guess a useful degree, but I couldn't think of anywhere I wanted to take it, and there were very few even kind of jobs I thought looked vaguely interesting because suddenly just there was nothing that I'd sort of nothing around. So I also at this time had quite a bad back injury, so I was like, well, I guess I just take some time out, and I moved back in with my parents because I didn't have a job, so had to move back in with my parents, and I had a lot of trouble playing the harp actually, which is really quite a difficult time. And And it took a couple of years of treatment, and mercifully it's much better now. And over that couple of years I got back into playing the harp, and I took on a few pupils because a couple of local people said, well, would I show them the harp? And I was like, well, I'm not really a teacher, but I can show you what I do. And and I found that I really enjoyed that. And I started sort of doing the odd gig, the odd wedding, that kind of thing. So, and then it just sort of continued, I suppose. And then after a couple of years of this, I still couldn't play as much as I wanted. I had a lot of referred pain down in my hand, which was really very distressing at the time. And I ran into an old friend who had a similar sort of background to me, but he had gone on to study classical music at university. And as all good stories start, we ran into each other in the pub, and we had a few pints, and it came out that he had had terribly bad tendinitis during his degree, and he could no longer play the piano to the extent that he would like to as well. And I was like, oh my God, so what did you do? You were still in music. What did you do? And he said, I'm doing a PhD in composition. You know what you should do? You should totally do a master's in composition. You should just go for it, because we did composition at A-level when we were at school together. You should totally just go for it. And in my 3 beers down or whatever, I was like, yeah, great plan. And this sounds very ridiculous. I literally on a whim the next day called up the Department of Music at my old university. I was like, right, so is this ridiculous? And I didn't realize at the time that professor is never in his office. He's never in his office. The whole time that I was tutored by him, he's never in his office, never answered the phone. That one time I rang up on a whim, he answered the phone. He's like, yeah, send in your stuff. See, we'll have a look at it and see if we think you'd be a good fit for the program. And so I ended up doing a master's in composition. Completely sort of not apropos of nothing. I'd always enjoyed composing, but it didn't occur to me as a thing you could study, because again I had this music equals classical music. You become a classical performer and you join an orchestra. I just didn't sort of have enough information, I guess. It never occurred to me you could write music or study writing music. And then so I ended up there, and I guess I supported myself by doing gigs and teaching and stuff. And then when I graduated, I was like, well, I quite like this, really. I really enjoy doing this. And I'd had some more sort of technique lessons with other classical harpists and stuff, and really, really worked on my technique on my own terms, which I think was very important. I was an adult now, not a 15-year-old. And if I didn't want to particularly play a piece, I'm not trying to get any music college. I want to improve for me and do the things that I want to do. And it was delightful because no one was telling me no or yes or do this.
You can rewrite the whole Debussy, and you have all the reasons in the world to tell people why I'm rewriting it in this way.
And nobody could say, oh, but you can't play jazz on the harp, or, well, that's not very suitable. I guess, and also, we're talking a decade later as well. So, society moves on, culture moves on. The internet now existed as a thing that people could access. In the late 90s, we still had dial-up, So the world was just a much more open place, I guess. And suddenly I was like, oh, I can do this. It was sort of wild, and I still think it's wild, to be honest. I never got past my grade 4, and somehow I'm a professional harpist. Just blows my mind. But I guess it shows that we shouldn't set our we shouldn't compare ourselves with some arbitrary standards. And exams are great. They can be amazing if you want to have goals to work towards, absolutely, but we shouldn't maybe compare ourselves to some imaginary version of ourselves that doesn't exist.
Mm-hmm. Oh, what a great story. And it must be liberating to kind of arrive to that point where you feel like you can just do what you love with the instrument instead of staying in that little box.
It is a huge privilege. It really, really is. I can't describe it in any better way than that. I'm so lucky. I'm so lucky, and I'm so grateful also that I did eventually, I was able to play again, because that was my biggest fear. That's why I did composition and not perform. I didn't do anything performance related, because I was so afraid that I would not be able to play in the way that I wanted. But I was lucky, and I got some treatment, and I got lots of physio, and I got some better technique lessons, and touch wood, I just have to be careful like we all do, and relax and make sure I stay in shape. Um, so yeah,
I'm also a fellow bad behaved pedal harpist, and I love playing
you
lever
tell.
harp. And you have a lot of really chromatic pieces that you play, including the cello suite, wax cello suite that you have recorded lately. Um,
Mhm.
how do you get yourself comfortable with lever shifting and making all these chromatic pieces work in your harp? I have a fascination of sort of lever shifting because I think it opens up a whole new possibility on the harp. Like all of a sudden we can play classical pieces on this harp. What about that? How weird does this make this harp now, right? It's
I
so
know.
fun, right?
Mhm.
What are some of the things you enjoy about doing chromatic music on the lever harp? What are some of the challenges that you have faced when making those music work on the lever harp?
Gosh, what a question. I think, first of all, the thing that I enjoy the most about being a harpist is, I mean, I enjoy playing. Obviously, I enjoy playing the harp, but I enjoy showing people the harp. I guess demonstrating to them what a lever harp can do, because it's actually a much more versatile instrument than I think a lot of people, not necessarily harpists, obviously a lot of harpists are very aware of the possibilities of it, but a lot of people who don't play the harp tend to put it in little boxes. You know, oh, you play the harp, oh, you wear the big dress, and you play in an orchestra, right? And I'm like, well, no, actually. No orchestra would be seen dead within 10 feet of me. Um, you know, so I guess I just was like, well, I like that piece. I'm going to see if I can play it. And I like that piece. When I was doing my master's, I would go swing dancing 3 nights a week because I just think it's great fun. I'm not a very good swing dancer, but that's sort of beside the point. It was just a great hobby. But I would go and I would come back and I would just have the music going around my head all the time because I went so often. Um, and when I was, supposed to be writing string trios or, something terribly academic sounding, um, I'd get, dare I say it, a little bit bored a couple of hours into, messing around with a sort of Weber-esque string trio. Even though I do actually genuinely like the style of music, but it does take it out of you quite a bit. It's very, very intense. And I'd just be like, I wonder if I can play like Flying to the Moon because we were dancing to that last night. And it would just be light relief to just try and play these pretty tunes, just nice music, And I guess it didn't have a lot of the baggage that maybe some of the music that I had grown up playing maybe had. So it's not a tradition that the harp has. So I didn't have to worry about, well, I'm not playing it like so and so. I'm not playing it like so and so. So and so is going to tell me that I'm wrong, which might have all been imagined. I'm sure people aren't actually that mean, but you do worry that people are going to be like, you're not, why are you doing that? And it was just so delightful. And then I realized I had a repertoire of about 10 sort of swing jazz pieces. And I'm not actually sure what. Actually, no, I know exactly what gave me the balls to do this. Can I say that?
You can.
I know exactly what gave me the nerve to do this was I suddenly realized my bank account was super low. And this was a bit of an issue, obviously, as with all students, but it was like really an issue because I didn't want to have to move back in with my parents again. And I saw an advert in the music department, like, we're looking for jazz musicians to play in a wine bar. And I was like, I can do that. I mean, I knew like nothing about jazz, but they were offering money. So I was like, I want to audition. And again, I wouldn't do this now. This is the thing. I'd be too nervous to do it now. But then I was like, well, I got to eat. So
Nothing to lose.
I literally didn't have a huge amount to lose. So I dragged my harp up to this wine bar on a trolley and I unpacked and I'm like, right, this is me in my newsprint dress. I had this great dress made of like newsprint, which is my favorite dress of the time, sort of swing style with a big skirt. And I was like, I play jazz. And they're like, oh, do you? I'm like, yes, I do. And I played them like a couple of jazz pieces. And they're like, all right, you can start on Friday. And I was like, okay. And I suddenly was like, I have 3 45-minute sets to fill. And I just was like, well, I guess I'd better learn some more. And I spent the entire rest of the week just bashing out a rough set. And I was like, I don't know what I'm doing. It was terrifying. I'd done a lot of background gigs. I'd done weddings and all that kind of thing. But suddenly I'm like in a jazz bar. I was like, oh my goodness. But sort of went okay. People, I think, were mostly intrigued by the idea of the harp even playing jazz. So even though I was not, definitely, and still not the world's best jazz musician, just playing music that people didn't expect opened so many conversations of like, oh, I didn't know you could do that. And I'm like, but isn't it awesome? And I would show people how it worked. And I think it just developed out of that. And I stopped thinking of it as I need to do lots of lever shifting to like, well, I need that note to be there. If that makes a kind of sense. So it's sort of,
Yes.
it wasn't so much as, oh, I want to do lots of complicated stuff so much as, well, I need that to be there. Like, I guess if you're playing the piano and you're not playing in C, you have to remember to put an F sharp in. If you're playing in G, every time you have to just remember. And it was a bit like that. It's like, oh, there I need an A flat and there I don't. So you just take it off. I guess that's sort of how that came about.
That's so fun. I watched your Take 5 video on your website. It's such a fun performance. And full of energy, and I bet you people would not expect hearing it from the harp.
It is a great one actually to do because people are like, I didn't know you could play that on the harp, and I love going in a concert from like something like that to Bach, and then something incredibly simple. Because again, I guess I don't want to run the risk of trying to imply that you can only play performance-worthy music on the harp if you can do a lot of complicated stuff, because that is it is simply not true. I enjoy it and it's fun and it's in part an intellectual challenge, but you can play the most simple pieces and they can be exquisite performance pieces, which is something I really like to get across to my students, that doesn't matter if you can only play two notes or two fingers together. There are pieces you can play, and if you play them well and play it like you mean it, it can be just as beautiful. So
And it's pretty hard to not sound beautiful with the harp. That is something I do appreciate about the instrument. Well, you have already talked about your love for jazz in there. You have also written some jazz music. What was that like for you to kind of get into now, from playing that jazz music to writing the jazz music?
I find jazz quite a hard genre to write in, because jazz, it encompasses so many different styles. And again, I think this is something to bear in mind and be careful about when we're talking about it, because I have a lot of people say, oh, I don't like jazz, which is fine, you're entitled to your opinion, but does that mean that you don't like Frank Sinatra? Oh, but that's not jazz. No, it is. Does that mean you don't like Scott Joplin? Okay, maybe. I like Scott Joplin, but you can see how ragtime piano isn't everybody's taste. I think when people think jazz, they think, oh, that experimental stuff that was big in the 70s with sort of screechy saxophones. And I admit, I find that quite hard on the ears. But it encompasses so many styles, so so I guess I just find it I find it quite a hard genre to write in. So it involves a lot of experimentation, and I have to think, well, I guess what style am I trying to do, if that makes a kind of sense. So I'm a big fan of the kind of cool jazz and the sort of modal jazz of the late 50s and early 60s, sort of Dave Brubeck or Miles Davis, sort of that kind of thing. I prefer that over the sort of swing stuff that I started with to play. I don't know, just appeals more.
Yeah, you're right. I think people tend to have, myself included, have a narrow understanding of what jazz is. And I can see that it is not something that you can easily put a pin on and say, this is how I'm gonna approach it. Now, just to complicate things a little bit more, because you play jazz, you have some classical music that you arrange for the harp, you write your own music, you play traditional music. If I were to ask you to use one word only to describe your sound, can you find one word to describe it?
Eclectic.
That works.
I don't think I can, and I think, I mean, possibly I'm just a jack of all trades and master of none. In fact, quite probably that's the case, because I do sometimes feel that I mean, we're never, possibly never masters anything, but definitely I look at someone who's just delved really deeply into a particular genre. I'm like, man, I'm never going to be that good at that particular thing, or like, I'm never going to be that good at playing traditional music. But I'm like, well, I play the music I like, and it makes me happy. Um, but I don't I don't think about playing in genres. I just think about, well, I like that tune. Something about that tune really, I just going around my head. I can't get it out of my head. I want to see if I can. It's like playing the record to the end to stop an earworm. It's like I have to play it. I have to see if I can play it, and then I'll internalize it, and then either it'll get out of my head or I'll do something with it. And there's no particular genre that gets stuck in my head that does that. It'll just be something I like.
I like that. So, in your vast collection of music, if we're new to playing your music, what are some of the pieces you would recommend us to try out?
From my compositions, or just pieces I'd recommend, or arrangements?
Let's say things are available in your shop that we can get a hold of.
Okay. One of my absolute favorite pieces in the world, actually, is one I do with beginners. Is a Welsh piece that's super obscure and almost nobody knows it. And I think because of that, it's not one of my most popular items. I also haven't got a video of it, I don't think. I've just never got around to doing it. It's a Welsh tune called, and I'll try not to butcher the pronunciation, Marnad Irerydd, which means elegy to a skylark, or possibly the death of a skylark. I'm sure a Welsh speaker will be able to give me a correct translation. And it is this exquisite Welsh folk tune, and it is just as exquisite. In fact, if it's okay, I'll just play the first
Would you
bit.
please?
It is just as exquisite with a one-note accompaniment as with more, and there's just so much you can do with it.
I like that. And I think you're right? We often think complicated tunes are the impressive tunes, but sometimes it's the other way around.
Absolutely not. I will often open a concert with this one. Anyway, I'll just stop talking and play it. So. So that's just the basic tune. So my B string is new, it's going a bit flat. There's almost nothing to it, but it is, to me, just a heart-rendingly beautiful melody. And there's three lines and one that's different, and that's it. And I will teach this to beginners, and then I'll do it in a workshop and then play it in a concert and be like, no, honestly, this is what I will be playing this evening. This exactly what I have taught to you. And I think I mean, obviously I will go on and sort of do variations, but none of them get that complicated. It just doesn't need a lot of notes. And there's so many pieces like that. Yeah,
I love it. I'm gonna have to
that,
check that one
would be
out.
one that I think people should absolutely check out. And I've written a few variations down that are ones that I like to play. But again, going back a bit to what we talked about earlier, is I struggle. I love arranging music, and I love arranging music to make it accessible, because the thing that I struggled with when I was learning the harp and learning to read music was a lot of the chord choices and the chord inversions that just seemed really arbitrary to me. which they probably were. They were probably people just writing down the way that they played. But as someone who liked to memorize music, I would get in such a mess because I would not understand what the chords were, if that makes sense. Whereas I preferred to learn it with like, oh, well, I need a C and an A and an F, and then I could kind of do my own thing. But going the other way to like inversions, and I just found it very, very hard to learn the music. So I like to try and make arrangements that are harmonically interesting, but not massively challenging, because again, things just don't need to be challenging to be beautiful.
Yeah, and I notice oftentimes your sheet music will have like a simpler version or an easy version, and I think actually those would potentially make really nice background music that people can
Yeah,
just
and
enjoy.
exactly. And again, there's the point of the easy versions, because the more advanced versions will essentially be the same thing. But I guess it's a way of what I like people to try and do is sort of make pieces their own. So if you have the simple version, which will often, not always, just have the outline of the chord structure, just like that did. So you've got an E and a D and a C, and then a C and a D and an E. And you can leave it at that. But maybe once you progress, you've been playing a few months or a year or whatever, you think, okay, well, I understand that that is the chord I want. And it's not a big stretch then to go, oh, now I know how to play the 158 pattern. And suddenly you don't have to relearn everything. You can just add in this new knowledge. So you're not having to relearn everything. And the idea is that they're progressive. And then you understand the structure of the piece. And once you do that, you can then go on to make it your own. Whereas if you just intend on memorizing exactly some possibly quite arbitrary inversions and chords and I found it just overwhelming, and I could never remember them properly, and I get my knickers in a twist, and then stress would happen and I wouldn't enjoy it. So I thought, right, how can I enjoy this, and how can I help other people enjoy it who have maybe experienced that same panic and stress if I'm not playing the notes right that are on the page, because we've all been there, and that's no fun.
Yeah,
And
it is.
worrying about being wrong is no fun. So
No, my favorite question to ask when I learn classical piece in my harp lesson is, so is Beethoven or Bach gonna come up from their grave and haunt me at night because I played the wrong note?
exactly, no. And I believe I'm not 100% sure, but I believe that they were actually known as improvisers. And again, they would write music down because the publishers would request it, and the patrons would request it, and people would want to play their music. But I have a strong feeling that I read somewhere that so much of what they did was just improvised, and someone said, "Can you write it down?" So that, and now we have this. Oh, it's written down, so it's fixed. It must be like this. Whereas they probably are like, "No, don't do that." Have fun with it.
That's
I don't know that.
awesome.
They might come up from their grave and punch me for that, but they're probably not.
I think they're closer to you. So if they do find you, give me a heads up so I will get ready.
Of all the people to come back and haunt, I'm really not worth it.
That's fun. Okay, well, I want to talk to you about experimenting. You have quite a few music experiments. You have done some really interesting work. There is the Suite for Lever Harp arrangement with a whole bunch of really interesting sounding pieces. And for anyone who is not familiar with it, go check it out. Tell us about experimenting with music, and why do you think it's so important to do?
Oh, wow, what a great question. I think I experiment because I feel like it's just a compulsion. I can't, again, with being the badly behaved pedal harpist, I couldn't help myself but go, well, what would it sound like if I did that? Which, I've always just had this fascination with sound. Just, I was always obsessed, even before I played an instrument, I was obsessed with finding sounds. And my poor mother was very tolerant. She'd let me bash the pan lids together to pretend I remember bashing the pan lids together to the radio and just make believing that I was in the orchestra and I was playing the percussion. And apparently I used to conduct the radio as well. I don't remember doing this, but apparently I did. And me and my sister used to make what we would call horrid music, which basically meant turning on every sound emitting device in the house at the same time. Musical boxes. We'd get the piano, we'd put the tape player on, we'd put on something that we recorded on our little, bedroom tape player, and set it all going at once. My parents were extremely tolerant. But I think I've just always been interested in sound and the way sound works. And so I guess that goes into the organized sounds in music, I guess. But also, well, I play, I play a tonal instrument, but I find tonality can be quite restrictive in some ways because, again, it can box you into a corner of like, well, if you use functional tonality, so like chord structures that go from dominant to tonic, or if you're unfamiliar with those terms, music that sounds like it needs to go to a place. It sounds kind of normal, and that's can be all very beautiful, but I sometimes feel like I just want I want something abstract, because sometimes it can be just overwhelming. You're like, this is very beautiful, and I'm going to end up here, and then we have four more bars, and I'm going to end up here, and sometimes that's comforting, and sometimes it's restrictive. So I guess I like experimenting to see where I can go outside of that. And I think sometimes this is why I come back to Bach, because I'm like, Bach is just so beautifully, perfectly structured. Someone else has done all the beautiful work, and all I need to do is play the exquisite notes and not think about anything else. So it's relaxing in a way. But sometimes I'm like, so the suite, the abstract, I wrote that. I think it's probably the least accessible, so I shouldn't have put it first. But it's possibly the most atonal of the pieces. And we'd been living in London for a while. My husband's job got transferred there, and we were basically living in Airbnbs because they were like, oh, it's only for a few months. And we're like, but we'd like an apartment. It's just for a few months. So we moved from Airbnb. We had 2 suitcases. We'd been living in Japan, and then he transferred him just sort of, not quite at the last minute, but it was fairly short notice. And all our stuff was stuck in customs. I'd borrowed a harp, and we were living out of 2 suitcases and just moving from Airbnb to Airbnb every couple of weeks. And it was not the most fun time, I have to admit, because obviously as a musician, you want to be making those connections and meeting people, and we never quite knew when we were going to be moved on to France, which was where they kept saying we'd be going in a month probably. So 14 months later, I was quite at the end of my tether, and I'd been to the Tate Modern, and they have this very powerful sculpture, or they did at the time, called the Sniper Tower. And I'm afraid I don't remember the artist, but it's basically a concrete tower, probably, I don't know, 6 or 7 feet tall. And it is a reconstruction of a building. I'm afraid I don't even remember what country now, which is embarrassing. Basically, it was a skyscraper that was never finished, and the country was at war, and it was only ever used as a sniper tower. And it was just a reproduction of this. And I just, I was in a sort of quite a confused place, and it was just so powerful. And I went home and played on my borrowed harp, and I was like, I don't feel like playing arpeggios. Nothing is suiting my mood. Nothing. Everything is just too regular and too pretty. And I just sort of did that with my levers, and like, just make some horrible sounds, please. Everything is too beautiful. And I just sort of carried on. I was like, ooh, there's sounds I've never made before. And that helped me to express more what I was feeling than anything tonal anything that I knew how to play already. Nothing was fitting the bill. And out of that, I wrote the abstract. It's possibly why it's quite abstract and quite hard to get into, because I was quite in a I don't know, a strange place. And then I was like, this is a really interesting way to compose, because I don't know what sounds I'm going to get. Normally, it's tonal. It's barely chromatic. I mean, it is chromatic, but it's barely chromatic. If you play a note, you know what sound you're going to get pretty much 100% of the time, because you know where your notes are. And suddenly, I had no idea what was going to come out. So even if, you know, I put my hands on the strings in a perfectly conventional arpeggio, I've no idea what I'm doing here. You know, I played a C, but I played an arpeggio of C, but it's not. And I'm like, that sound doesn't come from a lever harp. It comes from a piano and sort of, you know, early to mid 20th century experimental piano composition. But suddenly, I can do that. I mean, not quite that good, but you know what I mean. That sound world is accessible to me in a way that I never thought it was, and that's why I went down that route of doing all that. Basically, I quite like
That's
that.
so fun.
What
a great backstory of how you get into writing that suite of music.
I guess, yeah. I'm sorry, I feel like they're all very long-winded stories.
I like it. And it's fascinating to kind of hear where people's head went when they create those sounds and music. Like I often feel that music is an extension of us, and like the way that you were describing sort of how you try to get that feeling out of you because nothing pretty is happening, right? Like that is such an interesting mindset, and how it translates into music at the other end too. That's awesome.
And I think it's, I mean, I love the way that you explore these ideas of creativity in the Talking Harps. There's some fascinating things that people have said. It's such an interesting topic. But I think also, for me, this idea that when you are feeling strong emotion, it is easy to pour it out into art. I actually find the opposite. I find it very hard because it's such an abstract concept, and emotions are abstract, and music is abstract. Sometimes it comes so easily. You know, sometimes things just write themselves. Not often, but sometimes things do, and they're like, that's exactly what I'm trying to say. But I think we often forget that it can be quite a hard process translating one abstract thing into another abstract thing. You know, it can be quite tortuous at times. Yeah, I wish it was easy, but it isn't always. And sometimes you just don't. It's like that's still not saying what I want to say, which leads to more experimentation. If that's not saying what I want to say, what will? Do I go into extended technique? Do I add another instrument? Do I start hitting the soundboard? Do I collaborate? Will that help me to it? You know, I think this is why I think experimenting so important in creativity.
And I'm glad you managed to transcribe it into.
I mean, sometimes it just doesn't work, and those emotions just have to stay where they are until they dissipate, or they come out later. You know.
So in that suite, if I want to have one as a starting point to try, which one is the most accessible one out of the bunch?
I would say the most accessible is the lullaby. It's not hard to play at all. It's just moving sixths, but your levers are positioned in such a way that it doesn't sound like moving sixths. It's pretty easy to play, and it's not quite atonal. It's probably more sort of bitonal. It does eventually arrive at a resolution. I would definitely say that one. And if you want to challenge, the toccata is, I think, my favorite. It's a little more challenging to play, but I think it's quite fun, even if I do say so myself. And again, it's a fun concert piece because people don't expect that kind of thing from the harp. And then the last chord is a sort of bluesy chord, and I really was in two minds as to whether to leave that in or not. And I was like, yeah, why not just put it in? But yeah, those two. But the lullaby definitely is very easy to play. So if you want something that's just different, do give it a go. But it's also not everybody's cup of tea.
Okay, I will give it a go.
Please do. I'd be delighted to see someone else's performance if anyone ever wanted to play them. But I did write them.
It would be a good project, I think.
I seriously, I'd also be really interested to know how they were to learn for somebody, because I wrote them just purely as an experiment. You know, I mean, they're not everybody's cup of tea. You know, not that many people are into experimental harp music. It is quite niche, but I would be interested into how it felt on another harp, how it feels for someone else to play. Does it express an emotion that I think I'm expressing when someone else plays it? I don't know. So if you should feel so inclined, I'd be delighted to hear your opinions and feelings, and you could be just like, no, this is awful to play. What? Like, okay, I won't do that again. Because it's important. If people think something's awful to play, maybe one should change tack a bit.
Okay, well, if any of our audience have played any other pieces, we would love to hear what you think. Leave a comment.
Yes, I would adore to hear other people's interpretation.
And I will keep you posted if I end up trying one of these. You became a mother not too long ago. Has that changed the way you approach your music? Has it given you new inspiration? I have to mention the banana situation there that the jig was so fun. You wrote a little jig for your kid.
That was just the cutest thing. We just started weaning him like a few days before, and he very quickly cottoned on to this idea. Ooh, he is definitely my child. And he woke, I think I wrote a little blurb on the piece, but he woke up about 5:30 one morning. He's not a very good sleeper at the best of times. He woke up about 5:30 this morning with the hungry cries. Like, I am very hungry, mummy. Right now, I'm hungry. Feed me. So, I breastfed him, and he was like, but I'm still hungry. I was like, okay, we'll go get some banana. We'll see how that goes. And he'd already realized that banana was something good. And he just kind of jiggled in my arms. And I put when he had his banana, and he ate so much banana. Like, he was so tiny. Like, where did it go? I have no idea how and he was like, I was like, that's better. Thank you. And he would just sort of played at my feet with little toys, and I just had my harp there, and it's one of those times that I talked about earlier. I genuinely don't even really know where the piece came from. It almost just came out of nowhere, and he just sort of sat there and played and watched me. I was like, well, you like this, so I guess I'll write it down, and that's where that came from.
And have you find yourself playing music that are more calm because of the kid being around you? Or is he one of those that just kind of embrace whatever you play? How is he reacting to the harp?
He definitely just embraces whatever, actually. It's fascinating to watch him. He's definitely just into anything that makes noise. So I don't know any other babies, because I don't really have any other close friends that I'm in close contact with that have babies, and I'm the youngest in my family, so I'm very much I don't really know. I feel like I know nothing about babies. I'd never held a baby until I held my own, amazingly, at the age of 37. So I really don't know much about babies, but he's fascinated by just sound. Anything makes a noise, he's like, ooh, what's that?
You might want to pay attention to anything that makes sounds in your house.
I'm totally going to be encouraging the horrid music. I'm totally going to be encouraging. I say that now so blithely, but hopefully in the future I'll have a door. At the minute we live in a one-bed apartment, which is open plan, which is delightful and airy when it's hot. But we might need a door that I can close on my harps in the not too distant future.
That's fantastic. Well, I'm hopeful that he's going to be a good collaborator of yours if he's into music as much as you are.
I hope he appreciates music. I mean, obviously one only ever hopes that he'll be happy in whatever he does. But I would like it very much if he appreciates music, even if he doesn't want to do anything with it, because I have to have someone to sing Christmas carols with. I mean, it's such a family tradition. If he's like, no, I don't want to do that, I'll be a bit sad.
Fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed, yeah.
Yes. Well, you play the guitar as well. You have one right behind you, and you have actually wrote some songs as well. Your EP, Angel Bread.
Wait with me, wait till the shadows cross the tree. Go when you must, we both know one day you'll come back again to make angel bread.
lovely vocal. Thank you so much for sharing your
No, that
lovely
is so
voice
kind of
with
you to
us.
say. Thank you.
How did you get into songwriting, and do you want to write more?
So this is a really embarrassing thing to say, but I'm actually a terrible guitar player. I am really a bad guitar player. And
It's
I,
all relative. You play better than me, so you're good.
I mean, again, I realize that might sound incredibly arrogant, and I don't mean it in like it's. I'm not trying to like humble, like, oh, I'm a terrible guitar player, but but I actually, do singer songwriter stuff. But I don't think I would ever actually perform those songs live. I think I would probably have to get someone else to play, because I'd be too nervous. I don't think I could sing and play the harp at the same time. Maybe I could. Maybe if I was hungry enough, maybe that's what I need to do. But no, I genuinely, I started playing the guitar because I picked up my dad's guitar one Christmas holiday. It's 2019, Christmas of 2019, and we all know what's coming next. I've been at my parents' house, and my dad plays guitar, and I picked it up. I tried and I tried and I tried to play, basic chords. I looked on the internet. Here's how you play E minor. Here's like the 3 basic chords that apparently all beginner guitar players are supposed to play. And I still can't play them because I couldn't get my left hand into these contorted shapes. I don't know if you play the guitar yourself.
It's so different than the harp. Like, I just cannot make this, like, this is not natural. I'm like,
No,
this is me. This is not me,
I mean, you play 2 instruments. For a start, you play the piano. I still, as I said, I can't get my hand around the piano. I'm such a monolingual when it comes to music. But I really struggled. And I was just getting really annoyed at myself. I was like, surely, 10-year-olds in their bedrooms can play an A chord. And I still, to this day, cannot reliably play an A chord on the guitar. And I was like, right, okay, fine. What would happen if I retune the guitar? Ooh, Joni Mitchell did it. If Joni Mitchell did it, it's good enough for me. So, my poor dad, I retuned his guitar to I didn't even think about what I was doing. I just sort of like, well, let's do like an open fifth from the bottom. That's a legit thing to do, drop D tuning. I looked that up. And I don't like this, so I'll change this note. And like, ooh, I have a chord. And I basically made it so that I only had to use the middle finger of my left hand to play anything.
Nice.
And again, it's about this experimentation and doing like not what I'm supposed to do, because maybe what I'm supposed to do just doesn't work for me. And I was like, ooh, I can play. And I finger pick. Don't watch my technique, because I'm sure a guitarist will let you finger pick. Your technique is just terrible. But because I play the harp, it came more naturally to do the arpeggiating thing than to strum. Because I can't strum, it sounded awful. And I just sort of found myself humming tunes, I guess. And then the lyrics came from a really beautiful poem that a friend wrote for me. So I hope I didn't chop it up too much. But I'm an awful lyricist. I really, really struggle to write lyrics because I just find it's possibly too personal. And I know songs don't have to be personal, but I feel like they would come out personal. Like, oh, this is really embarrassing. I don't want to talk about that. So again, she very kindly let me use a lot of her poems as inspiration. And then I got back after the Christmas holidays, and a couple of months later we were in lockdowns. So I had this, it's like, I guess I've suddenly got no work because, everything, we all know everything stopped. And I just had happened right before this to borrow a guitar off a friend. I was like, well, I guess I've got nothing else to do. I guess I'll do this. The panic had a few, as we all did, all freelance musicians had this moment of panic. I was like, it's going to be okay. Somehow it's going to have to, get through this. And then I was like, well, I'll try being creative. I'll try doing something new. And I don't really know where they came from, if I'm honest. And then when the lockdowns finished, I was like, right, I'm going to record them just so I've done something to try it, see if it works. Yeah.
I like that attitude of just give it a go. Just try it. I like it.
I make it sound so flippant though, because there's so many things where I'm too afraid to try. I really don't want it to sound like, oh, I just try everything and it always just works, because it doesn't. And I think it's really important to be honest about that. There's so many things I've tried musically, and I've got books of sketches that are just, I think, oh, it's just rubbish. Why did I do that? Or like the pedal harp, I've tried, and I've gone back a few times, and I love it as an instrument, but I'm never going to be a good pedal harpist, and that's okay. But you know, I suppose I don't want to give the impression that, oh, everything I try just comes out beautifully. It doesn't. But I do like trying, and I think it's important to not be afraid, even though I
so
a lot of the time.
I think so too. I think it takes many bad tries to get one successful good try. So if we don't try, I don't think we'll get to that space where we get a couple of good tries.
Absolutely. And again, think about how children learn, and I look forward to seeing this unfold. I'm told that this is a fascinating process. They're not afraid to try. They're not afraid because they don't know what they should be able to do. They don't have a concept of, I should be able to do this, like we do as adults. I think we should eliminate, I've been playing the harp for 10 years, so I should be able to play X. No, there's no should about it. You play what you want to play, what makes you happy, in a way that makes you happy. If it stresses you out to a degree that's uncomfortable, obviously some pressure or some stress can be good to some people, you know, motivational, but yeah, we should try, and we should, and I say this to myself, try not to be embarrassed to put stuff out there, because it is so hard. It was not until the pandemic that I dared put any of my music on the internet at all. And I think if the pandemic hadn't happened, I might never have got around to doing it, because it's so terrifying. But it was suddenly this moment of, again, it's like with the jazz bar. Well, I suddenly have no work. You know, all of our musicians, our livelihoods have just disappeared, and I need to reach out to people and reconnect with musicians and pupils. And it's not about like, oh, it is partly, I guess, one needs to earn a living, but it's the community you lose, the connections you lose, everything, bam, just gone. And as a musician, playing music with other people is so important that I was like, well, if I don't do this now, I'm never going to do it. So let's just put stuff out there and try and make some connections and meet other musicians who are in the same situation, and hopefully we can, you know, have that solidarity and help each other along. And I've met some wonderful people through doing that, and you know, so I'm really glad that I did. But it is terrifying. It really is a scary thing to do.
So relatable, and I think in many ways the pandemic, as unpleasant as it was, I think it opened some new doors for a lot of people, myself included.
Absolutely.
If it wasn't for the pandemic, I don't think I would have the time to get serious in learning the harp.
Yes.
Right. And I wouldn't get serious in like learning about what everyone else is doing, because you know, everyone is doing things apparently, we just don't know about them.
Exactly. And suddenly there's like, oh, this person does this and this person, and again it's like that person, like experimenting. It never occurred to me to try that. I'm going to try that. And if that person had not had the courage to put their work on the internet, I would not have the pleasure of knowing about it. So I think this sort of sharing and showing people what we're doing and looking at what other people are doing is just so important. A musician can't exist in isolation. We can't. We need each other, you know.
For sure. Where do you see yourself taking your music going forward?
That is the $1 million question, isn't it? I honestly don't know. Which is not it's kind of a non-answer really, but I think there's so many strands to what I do. And I think basically I'd like to just more of this, please. But I love composing. I really do. I think composing is probably my sort of first love. Composing and arranging and improvising. You know, I'd love to play more jazz. I'd love to play more jazz with other people, because there's not really a massive jazz scene where I am, and I feel like I'm never going to really progress as a jazz musician until I can really, you know, play with other people. And again, that's a scary thing to do, especially on the lever harp, which is not an easy instrument to play jazz on. So I'd really like to learn more about that and to improve my skill in that area. I feel like every composer's got an unfinished concerto in them somewhere. I've got one movement that I wrote for my masters. Maybe I'll finish that. I also do a lot of sound work and sound design. I work a lot with my sister, who's a folklorist, and so I do a lot of soundscapes for her storytelling work, and that I find fascinating.
That's fun.
So again, we're basically making horrid music 30 years later. You know, she's still telling stories, and I'm still turning on all the sound emitting devices and putting them in different parts of the room, and then it's an exhibition.
Nice.
And yeah, I adore teaching, running workshops. I love getting people in a room and having them all play together. You know, especially people who maybe don't have that much confidence on the harp. Because again, I think it saddens me so much when people come and say, well, I was told I wasn't very musical by my teachers at school. And I just want to reach back through time and, you know, never, ever, ever tell a child that they're not musical. Some people have a better, more, you know, maybe more inclined to it than others. Sure, some people are better at maths than others. Some people are better at sports. But you don't tell them, oh, you're rubbish at this. Because what a horrible thing to do to anyone. And most people are. So I love, I guess, working with people and trying to bring out that confidence and showing that everyone can play in a group. Even if you can only play one note, you can still join in and it can still be beautiful, you know?
I love that. And okay, I'm gonna ask you this. You don't have to do it if you don't want to, okay? I would love to end this interview with a little improv from you. Are you up for doing a little improv?
A little improv. What kind of improv? What
Oh,
style?
wow, you're gonna have to surprise me.
And there's this beautiful lullaby called All the Pretty Little Horses, which is a traditional American folk song. And I originally learned it as a folk tune, so I'll play you that. And then when I was staying at my in-laws, I luckily managed to borrow a harp. And I was like, it's always this, what would happen if, I feel like that's my motto, what would happen if I changed the harmony? And I did. I'm like, this makes quite a fun jazz solo. So I'll give it a go. It might all just fall apart, but let's have a go. Nothing ventured, no, nothing gained. Yeah. Okay. So the original melody. something like that.
That is so much fun. I love it.
But again, there's an awful lot of, well, that didn't quite work. But, you know, I try to just sort of to roll with it and see and have fun.
Have fun is so important. If we can't have fun with the instrument, why bother?
Exactly. Like, why are you doing this? Why torture yourself?
Exactly. Love it. Thank you so much for sharing that. And how can we stay in touch with your work and what you're doing and what you're up to?
Well, it turns out there's very few harpists in the world called Tamsin. So there may be others. But if you just Google Tamsin Harp, or even better, Tamsin Dearnley Harp, I will probably show up, which is quite useful. I always hated my name. And then in the age of the internet, it's quite useful. I have a website, tamsindearnley.co.uk. You can also look at my YouTube channel, or you can email me, tamsindearnley@gmail.com. So yeah, and I love to hear from other harpists and just hear what other people are doing, you know. And
that's awesome. Well, thank you so much for spending your time to talk to me. It's delightful to get to know you and your work.
It was such a pleasure to meet you, and I really hope that we can meet in person and jam and play together.
That would be so fun. Yes, I'm gonna have to.
If I can ask you a question, if you don't mind. What are you playing right now? What do you enjoy playing? Because I feel like I've just talked, and I hope you don't mind me asking, but I know so little now about what you like.
What I like? Well, I try to. Okay, so this is a little project that I arbitrarily assigned to myself because I thought it would be a good way for me to expand my music horizon. For every harpist that I interview that publish sheet music, I would try to commit to at least learning one piece from them. Because I came into music with a relatively narrow understanding of music, right? Like I played piano, classical piano as a kid. So that was all I knew. And I actually do not like classical music. I find them to be quite boring. And I have a very small hand, so it's not very piano friendly. And when I start the harp, I was like, I got a Celtic harp. I got to learn Celtic music, right? That's all you do, right? And then I started playing some of them and I was like, yeah, like some are good, but not all of them are fun. Like there got to be more, right? Like, you know, people don't just play Celtic music on the Celtic harp. So my teachers start introducing other music to me. And then I start, you go into YouTube and like, oh my gosh, there's so much out there. So when I start talking harps, then I said, you know what, like all the harpists are doing different things. So if I can like take a random sampling of what they're doing, then maybe I'll learn something, right? So I really enjoy playing music that are very joyful and upbeat because that's who I am. Like I'm a very
I've been really enjoying your versions of Adriano's piece.
Right? Like
I've been enjoying that so much.
Love his music. And I also like what I've found. And again, like you said that in the interview, there are a lot of music that are very simple, but they are just beautiful, right? Like you don't need to do like crazy acrobatics on the harp.
No,
you get something that is beautiful. So that's why, like I always ask my guests, what would you recommend as something that is new to your music to try? And oftentimes, whatever they end up recommending end up being something that I just love so much that I put in my repertoire. So I've recently learned, for example, Nadia has The Light Summer Day. It's a very simple log.
That is gorgeous.
And it's gorgeous to play, and it's not something that I need to spend hours and hours to, get into. So I like that. I also like pieces that showcase different aspect of the harp. So that's why I asked you about the suite for lever harps, because I do think the lever harp is capable of creating sounds that perhaps we don't directly associate it with all the extend technique and whatnot. So there's a part of me that want to try it just to see
just to see.
Like. Yeah,
exactly. Just
so
to see.
it's I'm much like you. Like I'm a Jill of all trade, probably master in none, but I'm really enjoying seeing the vastness of what's available out there.
Exactly. It's such a fun exploration.
This is not my job, so if I just do it for fun, like there's no big consequences. Like I'm not gonna not get booked because I don't know what I'm doing. You know what I mean? And I think it's one of the best place to be, like, and for me anyway, I think, as someone who just want to learn the instrument for fun, then I have all the room and forgiveness in the world to try different things.
Uh-huh. And I'm sorry, I don't want to take up too much of your time,
No
but why the
worries.
harp?
The story has it that when I was a kid, my mom wanted me to learn a music instrument, which I think it's a great thing to do, except like it was not a super pleasant experience for me. But I value the ability to enjoy music and play music. Some like it's a different language. So I'm like, okay, you know what? When my kids are old enough, I want them to learn an instrument. Um, but let's try something maybe not violin or piano. So I was looking at like what else are out there, and real estate is a premium too in where I am, and we don't have a lot of room, so I don't want something too gigantic or big. I'm like, oh, what about the harp? And there's a local teacher here that teach harp, piano, and some of her students play violin, and she was putting together a recital for her student, and she said, why don't you take your daughter to come and watch and see if she likes it? So there was a couple of instruments being played in there, and I asked her like, "What do you think?" And I was keeping my finger crossed that she's gonna say yes to the harp, and so she did, and that's how we got into the harp. And I took 2 lessons with her teacher to get the basic hand postures so I can help her. And I wasn't really like thinking of learning an instrument again at that point. But then when the pandemic hit, I got more time in my hand. I'm like, I want to do this too. This is so fun because I have been dabbling in it. I just doesn't know what I'm doing half the time. So I thought it would be good to
That is
sign myself
so,
up for some lessons. So
uh-huh.
that's what I did, and then I have
That
been
is
playing.
just so wonderful.
Yeah, and you know what? You're absolutely right about kids in their experimentation. Like now, both my kids play music, and they're very different. And my son will sit at the harp and just play whatever, and he'll
Mhm.
improvise, and he doesn't feel like there's anything wrong with that. And like for me, I'll be so concerned because like, am I hitting the right note? Am I using the right chord? Which is not the best mindset to be in sometimes,
But
right?
it's so easy to say, oh, we should think like children. We're not children. We have adult responsibilities and adult experiences and all this baggage. We can't. It'd be lovely if oh, we just think like children, just like that. But we can't. We have to work at it. But I hope that watching your children, I'm hoping that watching Fox learn will help me to maybe shed some of that.
Yeah, you. I think you'll find it to be really a big contrast in some ways to sort of how adult brain works, and I really want to tap into that child sort of curiosity more
Yeah, yeah,
often because they're
yeah.
so good with doing that, and I think it's a great mindset to have. So
And
yeah,
they're so unself-conscious most of the time until they hit adolescence. This is from my experience with teaching, not from relatives. But yeah, I remember as a kid, just I would like compose music with someone in the room because they weren't listening, they didn't care. And now if there's like my husband's in the flat, I'm like, get out, I'm composing music, go take the baby for a walk. You can't listen. Yeah. And I'm like, he doesn't care, he's not judging, he's completely unmusical, so he's not even remotely judging what I'm doing, other than that there's noise coming from downstairs. But it's this self-consciousness, it's so hard. It just comes on you
it
one day and you
is.
suddenly realize you're afraid.
And I really like the sort of very absolute sort of conviction in kids. They're like, I'm doing this now. Don't you tell me to do anything different. I'm just gonna go at it. Or like, no, I'm not doing this. I'm done. Get out. Like there's no if, ands, or buts. There's no asking for forgiveness. That's just how they are, and they're
Like,
okay with
this
it.
is what I want. Like they know what they want. Like I've achieved. Good, right? Job done.
Right? It's
And
like, Mom, give me that banana right now. Right?
yes, objective achieved. I'm happy now. Like,
Right?
and to have that sense of satisfaction
Exactly.
would be so good. I mean, I do. One does get a sense of satisfaction, but I feel like it's much. We hold ourselves to just such high, impossible bars sometimes. We're very harsh on ourselves.
We are. And I think that's why I'm so interested in your work. 'Cause you seem to be happy in dabbling in different areas and not boxing yourself in.
I mean, I'm really happy to hear that that's how it comes across because it is true, but there's a lot of fear there as well, and I want to sort of share the joy that I do genuinely find in it.
And I like that. Like I will admit, when I was looking for a harp teacher, I look up their work, and if they only play one type of music, they're not for me. I want people who can play many type of music because then hopefully they will encourage me to play different music too. So I think that's hopefully how your students find you, right? That you will get them to
I
try
hope so.
different
I really
things.
hope so because I feel like I was so lucky. I mean, what are the odds that in the middle of West Yorkshire, which is just an area of the north of England, it's not a particularly special area, it's not particularly known as I'm not saying it's uncultured, but it's not particularly known as a massive cultural hotspot or anything. What are the odds that there's a harp teacher within a 15-minute drive of my parents' house who was willing to show her 9-year-old student music from all over the world? I mean, what are the odds? Could have been anybody. It could have been someone who was super rigid and put me right off
It could
playing
be
music.
it could have been that pedal harpist.
It could have been that pedal harpist too. I don't want to knock because he was just a lovely, lovely guy, but he come from such a different world. And she was just so open-minded. So I try to do that with my students, and say, well, what do you want to do? What do you want to play? Why are you playing the harp? Because if you're playing the harp because you want to play Celtic music, fine, we can look at that. We can look at that tradition. If you're playing the harp because you just like the sound of the harp, let's find music that you enjoy playing. You might, and it is important to try different things. I'll make them. I'm sure your teacher did. Well, you will learn this piece by Mozart because it's important to understand the context or whatever. But if you want to also transcribe that piece by Metallica, we'll do that next.
If you don't try, you will not know what you're missing out. That's what I'm telling myself. And if you try it and you don't like it, that's okay. You don't need to go for a repeat. You don't need to go back for seconds, right?
Exactly. But you will have learned something. You'll have learned something along the way.
Yes. Well, once again, thank you so much for this delightful chat. And I will keep you posted on my adventure with your music.
Please do, and thank you so much for asking me. It's been an absolute pleasure. I just really hope that I get to meet you in person one day.
Yes.
And I will continue to follow your practice diaries.
Thank you.
They're very inspiring. I'm like, oh, I should be practicing. No,
Peer pressure really works, eh?
But it's lovely. It's just lovely to see it. I'm like, yeah, you're doing the thing.
I'm trying. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you. Bye bye. You too.